What is a home? Even though it means different things in different situations, who should have one? Is it a right? Should some be allowed to own many and others none?
Irish people are shocked at the number on the housing list and indeed homelessness. Near TV invited politicians, campaigners, trade unionists and people on the lists to talk to us about their perceptions, fears and hopes for the eradication of this inequality.
Sometimes even agreeing where we are can be fraught with danger.
I'm not really mad on the term crisis myself, because crisis implies something out of our control, something natural, and actually what we have going on today is entirely man-made and we did it all ourselves.
There's not a crisis, there's an emergency. And I wish people would stop using the word crisis. It's a word the government love. An emergency allows the government politically more traction in terms of looking outside the box in terms of fiscal rules within the European Union to deal with it. We have an emergency.
I would call it a crisis. Homelessness rates are at record levels. Building rates are far below what you'd need. So to just track population growth, you'd need about 30 to 35,000 new units. We've nowhere near that, and we'd probably need more.
For the first time in decades, 67% of Irish people now rent their homes. There are 40,200 on the Dublin waiting list alone, 120,600 nationally.
Hi, my name is Roz Kiley. I live in Swords with my 3 children, Vicky 17, Sasha 6 and William 3. And we rent our home here in Swords for the last 7 years. We're in a 2-bedroom end of terraced house in River Valley in Swords. My 17-year-old daughter and my 3-year-old son share a bedroom, and my daughter Sasha, who's 6, has autism, and when she was diagnosed 3 years ago I gave her my bedroom. So for the last number of years I've been sleeping on my sofa.
What, in your opinion, gave rise to this situation?
Well, I put it in the words of a guy called Michael Walsh. He was on Morning Ireland yesterday morning. He's the CEO of Waterford City Council, and he's part of this team now that's been set up by the local authorities to deliver on public housing and social housing. He said it was government policy, and it was government policy. The local authorities just did not build houses that were needed.
And really the origin of it is midway through the 1980s. Politicians and civil servants made a very conscious decision that they wanted to withdraw government, to withdraw the state from a central role in the provision of social and affordable housing. In their view, the private sector is to deliver social and affordable housing. The state has some role, it provides some social housing and some income supports and some affordable mortgages. But it's really a wholesale shift.
It's completely ideological. They have a hands-off approach when it comes to housing. The thing is, everybody in Ireland will have a home, will have a roof over their head, as long as someone's making a profit out of it. And that's the ideology of those who are in government at the moment.
We've had 3 ministers for housing, Alan Kelly of Labour, Simon Coveney and now Owen Murphy of Fine Gael, and they are basically following the same path. Everyone puts their hands up and says this is shocking, how far we've fallen as a society, as a supposed republic, and nothing changes in terms of government policy. They still go with the same pro-market dependency, which has failed us utterly.
They are less and less getting directly involved in the provision of housing and essentially asking the private sector to do it, and then they're subsidising the tenants.
When the market fails, I think the onus is on the state. The state absolutely has to step in and it has to fund, capital funding, for an increase in supply.
The incremental sell-off of public housing down through the decades, 70s, 80s, 90s, up to today, where the state has basically abdicated responsibility to house its citizens and has relied totally on the private market and the free market.
Handed it all over to the private sector, and the private sector has no conscience, has no worry for people's rights, only has one motive, and that motive is profit. And we've ended up here because of policy decisions, not by any accident.
Rents have risen 61% since 2012.
My landlord is very nice man. I never know when I could get a call from him to say, you know, I'm putting the house up for sale. There's just no guarantees.
There's about 175,000 landlords in Ireland. 90% of them have 1, 2 or 3 properties, so they're very small scale.
You wait on a list for 10, 12, in some cases 14 years, and you pay what's called a differential rent. It's a percentage of your household income.
In the new year, I usually get a letter with my position on the housing list, and if I'm really honest, sometimes the numbers go higher as opposed to going lower. As the new year comes, I always say, hopefully this will be our year, but nothing really changes. There's only that one letter of contact, and then, I mean, that's kind of it till the next year.
Despite increasing supply over a 40-year period, house prices have not reduced. Yet some perceive the problem as a lack of endeavour.
And I think it's a false argument to say that everyone on social housing doesn't work, or, you know, they're out there taking advantage of the state. It's very, very wrong.
I have always worked. I've always had those ethics and those morals. I'm not a bum. I work hard. It's a full-time job when I come home from work to look after my 3 kids, especially my daughter with special needs. So it's not a case that I'm just sitting waiting for a social house. I work as a carer. I do a good job. All my friends work, and lots of us are, you know, struggle from time to time. I mean, my rent here is just about affordable for me on my own, working and claiming FIS. And I mean, half my children's allowance each month goes into my rent because that's just the way it is. There's nothing really spare. There's no savings, nothing like that. I drive a banger, you know what I mean?
Affordable housing is housing, I suppose, for those people who are above that income limit, somewhere between 45,000 and 75,000. What government has favoured in the past isn't so much public provision of affordable housing, but providing people with access to credit to assist them in buying overpriced homes.
We're able to make loans affordable for people, or try to make them affordable for people, for houses of €320,000. Can they not make houses affordable for people rather than the loans?
Let's just take that example in Ballymun, the one big thing. It cost them, I saw the range of prices, something like between 150 and 170, I think 175. Local authority housing costs a similar level. You know, house prices are coming in at 370, 380. Why the difference?
And even now, despite all this talk of recovery and a republic of opportunity, we still have very, very low levels of investment in social housing and virtually no investment in affordable housing.
The difference is the developer's margin and the cost of land.
The issue of land and builders and how they affect this supply.
In Budget 2009, they introduced a land windfall tax, I think of 80%, if I recall. And Budget 2015, that just sort of mysteriously went by the wayside with no real explanation as to why. Now, things like the vacant site levy in the latest budget, that's kind of welcome. But even at that, why not bring it forward? We're in a, why start in 2019?
And typically builders only build when they see prices rising. And the second part of that is that you see there's a handful of builders who own an awful lot of land but are churning out very small numbers of houses every year. So they're controlling the supply of land to the market. So the gig now is not about making profit from building houses, because very few houses are actually being built every year. What you do is, the game now is about trading land. Buy land, get planning permission for which increases the value of the land, sell the land with planning permission, lobby, get smaller houses, get a different planning permission that's more valuable, more units on the same piece of land, sell that on to somebody else. So the game is about trading land rather than building houses, and there's much more money to be made in trading land because there's no risk.
They haven't started building homes. They're still waiting. They're restricting supply. They're holding back supply, because when house prices go up, the government's balance sheets and NAMA's balance sheets and the bank balance sheets all look healthier and look better, and we get all these great statistics around GDP growth.
A big kind of issue in this, and kept coming up again and again in our research, is it's really hard to sort of get a hold on who precisely owns land. There was research done before the crash, and I think the statistic was the local authorities held about 30% of the zone developments in Dublin, and now, or in 2007, it was about 9%. You could probably assume that that might have gone down further. So there's been a sort of a transfer of land into the private sector from public hands over the course of 30 years.
I would much prefer we talked about public housing, which would be housing funded by government on public lands for a very broad range of income groups.
At a demonstration for public housing, we met up with Michael Kelleher, who gave us his interpretation of public housing.
We need to move away from council or social housing to public housing. It's a major, I think, battle over language that we need to engage in. We need to convince people that public housing, if you're a professor, if you're a nurse, if you're a guard, if you're a secretary, if you're whatever job you're in, that you should have a right to housing.
I like the term public housing because I think an ideal would be is to get to a stage where anyone, irrespective of their income, can go on the local authority housing list and have the local authority as your landlord for a differential rent that's proportional to your income.
What we need here, to borrow a phrase from the neoliberals or from the Tories almost, we need competition here. The private sector needs competition, and the only place the private sector is going to get that competition is from the public sector. So on behalf of the public, the government needs to develop a housing stock, the sort of housing stock that I grew up in.
First thing is we don't actually have the term public housing in Ireland, right? We have social housing, we have private housing. What we need is public housing. And public housing is land that is housing that is supplied and supported by the state for people who perhaps earn too much for social housing but not enough to buy a private house. We can build houses really cheaply in Ireland. And when you do that, you're in control of the design and the delivery of the housing, and of course it creates employment for the building industry and building trades and allows us to start up apprenticeships.
Ultimately, we need a public housing stock that could be 20 or 30% of the entire housing stock in the state. It's currently 8%, so you can see the kind of the level of growth and output that we need.
There are options on the part of the state, and even at that, it's not even clear that the current strategy, if we're sort of looking to curb spending, that the current strategy of just following rental price increases and giving the gap to private developers even sort of represents good budgetary practice on the part of the state.
For all citizens of all classes, all grades, all incomes, that the state would be the provider of housing for every citizen and the guarantor of housing for every citizen. It needs to be put into a referendum. It needs to be enshrined as a Bill of Rights. You know, in the not too distant past, you know, a couple of 100 years ago, education wasn't seen as a basic human right. Housing needs to be put on the same footing. And the state needs to be the guarantor of that. The state is the only entity that has the wherewithal to do it, has the land banks, the legal powers, the CPOs, the finance to do it. What's missing is the political will.
It can't be done. That would be the biggest game change for everybody in this country, because it take pressure off the state paying money to private landlords and giving out loans for €320,000 houses.
And it seemed that having this kind of public housing option restrained prices, dampened these movements. Even just for the wider economy, this could be a great intervention just to keep us out of that boom-bust cycle that we've been caught in.
Hotels, hubs and hovels is all that is on offer. 1,530 families and 3,333 children are homeless. 72% for the first time. What in your mind needs to be done?
Peter McVerry, who once said to me, actually at a near FM event over in Parnell's, he says, when he was asked, how did you, over the years, did you find that you got any action, any movement from government? And he said, you have to shame the bastards.
So, very, very simple, very, very clear, increased investment, increased targets, but also housing policy that's inclusive for all sections of society.
And challenge the sods that are telling you that we can't do it, because it can be done.
There are 3 golden rules in terms of resolving a problem, whether it's in a business, society, or a household. First rule is you do not delegate the resolution of a problem to the party that caused the problem. First rule. Second rule, you do not delegate the resolution of a problem to a party that has no interest in resolving the problem. And third rule is you do not delegate the resolution of a problem to a party that is actually profiting by the current situation.
Set up a state building company and acquiesce as much public land as possible and build.
It's a class issue, it really is, and there's a certain class of people who are doing quite well out of the housing crisis, and there's a class of people who are doing miserably. You could probably break it off into the top 20% and the bottom 20% as the extremes of it.
State-owned housing company that I would resource with workers, bricklayers, plasterers, labourers, electricians, roofers, tilers, and I would then put the land that was bequeathed to us in many cases through the crash in 2008 and other state-owned land to work. That shouldn't sound radical.
And people at the top end will always be able to look after themselves, which is fine, and that's the market can look after them, and that's perfect. But it's everybody else, and the state has a role to look after people. That's why we pay our taxes, and at some stage it'll have to step up a little bit more than it has done today.
They're not doing it because someone's making money out of them not doing it, quite often themselves.
The average housing assistance payment is $17,900 per annum, which means 2 to 3 weeks of the total HAP payments equals the total yearly output of local authority housing.
I have become slightly more thicker skinned, and I will speak my mind a lot more than I did prior to that. But no, I don't bang on doors. I probably should. People tell me I should, but you know, I'm on the list, and I just hope that it'll come through for us.
It seems the participants agree that public housing is the long-term solution to Ireland's housing problems. At present, Ireland has 9% of its housing stock as public sector housing, as compared to 17% in England, 33% in Holland and 42% in Sweden. We did ask the government parties, Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil and the Independent Alliance to take part in this discussion, and while they did return contact, they never showed for interviews. The perception is they will continue to rely on market forces and private enterprise to solve the housing issue. We can only hope they take on board the contributions of some, if not all, of the people involved in this programme.
Just a home where we can set ourselves up and just live.